The North Atlantic in April 1912 was cold and still. Ice moved south along established routes, carried by the Labrador Current. The water temperature held near freezing. Surface conditions were calm. Visibility was clear. Stars reflected off the ocean without distortion. There was no moon. The RMS Titanic departed Southampton on April 10, 1912. It was the largest moving object built by human effort at that time. The ship measured more than 270 meters in length and displaced over 52,000 tons. It carried approximately 2,200 people, divided between passengers and crew. The passengers were separated by class, first, second, and third. Each class occupied distinct sections of the ship and had limited interaction with the others. The ship's route took it westward across the Atlantic toward New York. This was a standard path for transatlantic passenger vessels. Ice warnings had been received by wireless throughout April 14th. The warnings indicated the presence of icebergs in the ship's projected path. Some warnings were delivered to the bridge, others were not. The ship maintained speed. At approximately 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, a lookout in the crow's nest observed an iceberg directly ahead. The alarm was sounded. The bridge ordered the engines reversed and the rudder turned. The ship began to turn, but the iceberg was too close. The collision occurred on the starboard side, below the waterline. The impact was not violent. Many passengers did not notice it immediately. The iceberg opened a series of ruptures along the hull. Water entered 6 of the forward compartments. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was aboard. But he inspected the damage and concluded that the ship would sink. The bulkheads were not sealed to the ceiling. Water would spill from one compartment to the next as the bow sank lower. The process could not be stopped. The ship carried lifeboats, but not enough for everyone aboard. Regulations at the time required lifeboat capacity based on tonnage, not passenger count. The Titanic exceeded the legal requirement, but the number of boats remained insufficient. There were 16 wooden lifeboats and 4 collapsible boats. Together, they could hold approximately 1,200 people. More than 2,200 were aboard. The order to uncover the lifeboats was given shortly after midnight. Distress signals were sent by wireless. Rockets were fired into the sky. Passengers were directed to the boat deck. Many were confused. The ship did not appear to be in immediate danger. It was level and well lit. The sea was calm. Some passengers refused to board the lifeboats, believing they were safer aboard the ship. The lifeboats were launched beginning around 12:45 a.m. The process was disorganized. Officers gave conflicting instructions. Some boats were lowered half-empty. Others were filled beyond capacity. There was no universal evacuation plan. The crew had not conducted a lifeboat drill. Many did not know how to operate the davits or manage the boats once they were in the water. Women and children were given priority, though this was not enforced uniformly across the ship. In some cases, men were allowed to board if no women were nearby. In other cases, men were ordered away at gunpoint. The policy varied depending on which officer was supervising the loading. As the bow sank deeper, the stern began to rise. The angle of the deck increased. Movement became difficult. Passengers who had remained aboard now sought lifeboats. But most were already gone. The last boats were launched around 2 a.m. By that time, the ship's angle was severe. Furniture slid across the decks. The lights flickered, then failed. At approximately 2:20 a.m., the ship broke apart between the third and fourth funnels. The stern rose vertically, then sank. The process took less than 3 minutes. Those still aboard were thrown into the water or pulled down with the ship. The water temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time in such conditions was measured in minutes. The lifeboats were scattered across a radius of several miles. Most had drifted away from the sinking. The occupants heard the sounds of people in the water calling for help. A few boats turned back. Most did not. The officers in charge of some boats argued that returning would result in the boats being swamped by desperate swimmers. This reasoning was accepted by the majority of occupants in those boats. A small number of people were pulled from the water. The rest drowned or died from hypothermia. Among the lifeboats was one that carried a number of women and children, along with a small crew to manage the oars. The boat had been lowered from the port side during the middle phase of the evacuation. Its occupants were a mixture of first, second, and third-class passengers. Social distinctions had blurred in the chaos. The boat was not filled to capacity, though it held more than 30 people. In this boat was a woman holding a young child. The child was not hers. During the boarding process, a mother had handed the child to her, either because she could not board herself or because she believed the child would have a better chance with someone already in the boat. The moment was brief and confused. No names were exchanged. The boat was lowered before any clarification could occur. The woman was in her 20s. She wore a coat over a nightgown. She had been asleep when the collision occurred. She had dressed quickly and made her way to the boat deck following instructions from a steward. She had not intended to take responsibility for a child. The situation had simply unfolded that way. The child was approximately 2 years old. It was too young to speak clearly. It did not cry immediately, though it clung to the woman. She wrapped her coat around the child and held it against her chest for warmth. The lifeboat rocked gently as it moved away from the Titanic. Yet the occupants of the boat watched the ship from a distance. The lights remained on for some time. The angle of the deck became more pronounced. There was little conversation. Some women wept quietly. Others sat in silence. The crew members rowing the boat focused on putting distance between the lifeboat and the ship. They had been told that suction from the sinking could pull nearby boats down. When the ship's lights went out, the darkness was total except for the stars. The sound of the ship breaking apart carried across the water. It was a deep grinding noise, unlike anything the occupants had heard before. Then the stern rose and sank. The sound of people in the water followed. It was loud at first, then gradually faded. The woman held the child and did not look toward the wreckage. The child had begun to cry. She rocked it gently and whispered, though she did not know if the child understood. The crying stopped after some time. The child fell asleep. The lifeboat drifted. There was no plan to return to the wreckage site. The crew member in charge had decided it was too dangerous. A few passengers protested, but the decision held. The boat remained in the general area, moving slowly with the current. Hours passed. The cold deepened. The woman's coat was damp from the child's breath and from moisture in the air. She did not have gloves. Her hands became numb. She kept them tucked around the child to preserve warmth for both of them. Others in the boat shared what they had. A flask of brandy was passed around. The woman took a small sip, but did not give any to the child. A man offered his scarf. She wrapped it around the child's head. A woman nearby began to sing quietly, a hymn. Others joined. The singing lasted a few minutes, then stopped. The child woke and cried again. The woman tried to soothe it. She had no food or milk to offer. She dipped her fingers in seawater and let the child suck on them, though this provided no real nourishment. The child quieted and dozed again. The night stretched on. The woman lost track of time. Her body ached from sitting in the same position. Her arms were stiff from holding the child. She did not shift her grip. The child needed the warmth. Other occupants of the lifeboat spoke in low voices. Some discussed what they had seen. Others wondered aloud about family members who had been aboard. A few prayed. The woman did not join the conversations. She focused on the child. As dawn approached, the horizon became visible. The sea was still calm. Debris floated nearby. Deck chairs, pieces of wood, life jackets. Bodies were visible as well, floating face down in their life jackets. The occupants of the lifeboat looked away. The light grew stronger. The woman could see the faces of those around her more clearly now. They were pale and drawn. Some had been injured during the evacuation. A man had a gash on his forehead. A woman's hands were bleeding from rope burns. No one complained. At approximately 4 a.m., a ship appeared. It was the RMS Carpathia, a Cunard liner that had responded to the distress call. The Carpathia had traveled through the night at high speed, navigating an ice field to reach the site. Rockets were fired to signal its arrival. The lifeboats began to row toward it. The recovery process took hours. Each lifeboat was brought alongside the Carpathia. Survivors climbed a rope ladder or were hoisted aboard in a canvas sling. The woman held the child and waited her turn. When the lifeboat reached the ship, she was instructed to hand the child up first. A crew member took the child, then reached down to help her climb. On deck, the survivors were given blankets and hot drinks. The woman was taken below to a passenger cabin that had been cleared for survivors. The child was carried to the ship's hospital. The woman tried to follow, but was directed to rest first. She was given dry clothing and tea. She sat on a bunk and waited. After some time, a steward came and asked for her name and details. She provided what information she could. She explained that the child was not hers and that she did not know the child's name or the name of its mother. The steward noted this and left. The Carpathia remained in the area for several more hours, recovering all the lifeboats. Once the search was complete, the ship turned toward New York. The voyage would take 3 days. The woman was eventually taken to see the child. It was in a cot in the hospital area, sleeping. A nurse explained that the child appeared healthy, though it was showing signs of distress and would not eat. The woman sat beside the cot and held the child's hand. Over the following days, efforts were made to identify the child. Survivors were questioned. Lists were compiled. The woman described the mother as best she could, but her memory was unclear. The boarding had been chaotic. She had seen the woman's face for only a moment. No one came forward to claim the child. It was possible the mother had survived and was elsewhere on the Carpathia, unable to move freely or unaware that the child was safe. It was also possible the mother had not survived. The woman continued to care for the child during the voyage. She fed it when food was provided. She changed its clothing when dry garments became available. She sang to it and held it when it cried. The child began to respond to her, reaching for her when others approached. Other survivors took note. Some women offered to help. Others suggested the child should be placed in a more formal arrangement once the ship reached New York. The woman did not disagree, but she also did not release the child. The woman walked the deck with the child when weather permitted. She spoke to other survivors. She learned their stories. Many had lost family members. Some had been traveling alone. A few had been separated from loved ones during the evacuation and did not know if they had survived. The child became a point of focus for some of the survivors. Women would stop to look at it, to touch its hand, to offer small comforts. The child represented something they could not articulate. It was alive. It was young. It was a reason to continue. The woman understood this. She allowed the interactions. She did not claim ownership of the child. She simply held it and kept it safe. On the 3rd day at sea, a steward informed the woman that efforts were underway to locate the child's family. Telegrams had been sent ahead to New York. Lists of survivors and missing persons were being compiled. The woman nodded, and she had expected this. On April 18th, the Carpathia arrived in New York. The docking was delayed by weather and crowds. Thousands of people had gathered at the pier. Journalists, family members, and officials waited for the survivors. The disembarkation was slow and chaotic. The woman carried the child down the gangway. She was met by a representative from the White Star Line who directed her to a processing area. She was questioned again about the child. She repeated that she did not know its identity or that of its mother. She was told the child would be placed in the care of authorities until a family member could be located. The woman asked if she could remain with the child until that time. The official hesitated, then agreed. She was taken to a facility where survivors were being housed temporarily. The child remained with her. In the days that followed, the woman was interviewed multiple times. Newspapers published her account. She became known in some reports as the woman who had saved a child, though she rejected this characterization. She had not saved anyone. She had simply been in a lifeboat. The child's identity was eventually determined. A relative came forward after reading a description in the newspaper. The mother had not survived. The relative took custody of the child. The woman was present when the transfer occurred. The child cried and reached for her. She handed the child over and left. The woman returned to her own life. She did not speak publicly about the Titanic again. She had done what the situation required. The outcome had been survival for the child and for herself, but not for many others. The randomness of it was not something she could explain or reconcile. The child grew up and lived a full life. The relative who raised the child told the story of the evacuation. The woman who had held the child in the lifeboat was remembered in family accounts, though her name was eventually lost. The lifeboats from the Titanic were returned to the White Star Line. Some were repaired and reused, others were dismantled. The regulations governing lifeboat capacity were revised. Ships were required to carry enough boats for all passengers and crew. Drills became mandatory. The night of April 14, 1912, remained a point of reference in maritime history. The inadequacy of preparation and the randomness of survival were studied. But the individuals involved were not abstractions. They were people who had acted within the limits of their knowledge and circumstance. The woman had held a child in a lifeboat for several hours. She had kept it warm and carried it to safety. The child had lived because of a sequence of choices and chances that could not be replicated or predicted. The woman had not chosen to be in that position. She had simply been there. The lifeboat had been launched. The ship had sunk. The Carpathia had arrived. The child had been claimed. Life had continued.